Get out, you parasite. I was stunned, staring at my belongings thrown at the front door. My mother-in-law's voice cut through the air like a knife. Seeing her demonic expression, I understood everything. My sister-in-law was peeking from behind, and a cold sweat ran down my back. Jack wasn't home yet, which meant these two were trying to kick me out without him knowing. "Don't you ever come near my brother again," my sister-in-law sneered, exchanging a triumphant smile with her mother. I looked around, but there wasn't a single passerby in sight. I felt like a frog being stared down by a snake. Swallowing hard, I said, "I'll be gone in an hour," trying to keep my voice steady. It was a gamble. I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a call to a certain person. "My name is Emma. I'm a 35-year-old web designer living in the city. I first got interested in web design during my college days, which led me to this career. Despite the daily busyness, my work doesn't involve much overtime, and I've been leading a fulfilling life. The turning point came 2 years ago when a colleague mentioned, 'I have someone I want you to meet,' and out of curiosity, I agreed. At that time, I was honestly ready to enjoy single life without getting married. 'Just meet him once, what do you say?' He's a friend from my college days, a nice guy, though a bit timid," my colleague said, laughing over drinks. So, I decided to meet Jack. "Nice to meet you, my name is Emma," I said the first time I met Jack at a cafe near street. We both had work, so we chose a place where we could meet casually and quickly. "Hi, nice to meet you, I'm Jack," he introduced himself in a high-pitched voice, clearly not used to dealing with women. Initially, Jack didn't start much conversation, but when I mentioned that driving was my hobby, his eyes lit up. It turns out he works as a car mechanic and loves cars. He's a year older than me but had no experience dating women, which he seemed quite concerned about. However, as we talked more about our hobbies, he warmed up significantly. By the time we parted, we had even made plans to meet again. Life is so unpredictable. After a few dates, Jack and I started a relationship. As my colleague had warned, Jack had a timid side. He always worried about my preferences when choosing a restaurant, but that was part of his kindness, which I didn't mind. In the past, I preferred more assertive men, but as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate someone calm and conversational. In that regard, Jack was the perfect match. A year into our relationship, Jack proposed, and we decided to get married. Before meeting him, I never thought I'd be married within a year. Everything happened so quickly that it felt almost scary, but Jack was a stable and reliable person, which reassured me. Since my parents passed away in an accident when I was young, I was raised in an orphanage and had no parents to introduce Jack to. On Jack's side, his father was absent and his mother and sister lived together. So, we decided to visit his family home to meet them. Jack seemed oddly gloomy when I suggested meeting his mother and sister, which I chalked up to nerves. On the day of the visit, Jack and I arrived at his family home, an old house that felt like a real family home. I wore a simple black dress, suitable for meeting his family. "Nice to meet you, my name is Emma," I said, greeting my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. There was a brief pause as they sized me up. My mother-in-law looked like a high-class lady with glasses and a sparkling bracelet. My sister-in-law was quite heavy and dressed flamboyantly, which was a stark contrast to Jack's slim build. I was surprised by how different she looked from him. "Oh, you must be Emma. Nice to meet you, I'm Jack's mother," she said. Her tone was polite, but there was something sticky about it. I was wondering what kind of girl would show up, and wow, you really surprised me, so plain and that dingy dress too. I was stunned by her words. "Well, just prepare yourself because you'll be doing as we say from now on," my mother-in-law continued, with my sister-in-law nodding in agreement. I had no idea what they were talking about and stood there, dumbfounded. Didn't Jack tell you? It was promised that when we got married, you'd live here with us, my sister-in-law said. That's right, Mom's legs are bad, and I'm busy looking for a spouse. So you know the drill, she added, leaning in close to Jack. He looked troubled but nodded in agreement. Wait, what do you mean by living together? I asked, feeling shocked. That's exactly what it means. We're going to live here, Jack said, looking guilty. I couldn't believe it. The idea of living with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law hadn't been mentioned before we got married. It was clear from just one look that these women weren't good people. I felt an urge to flee right then and there. It'll be fine, right, Mom? Emma, and you'll get along, right? Jack asked, trying to smooth things over. Yes, of course. She's a precious daughter-in-law, after all. We'll take good care of her, my mother-in-law replied, her tone ringing false in my ears. It didn't seem likely they would take good care of me at all. I'm sorry, but I have to leave, I blurted out, wanting to escape. The meeting ended soon after, but on the way home, I confronted Jack. I'm against living together. You never know what might happen, I said, hoping he'd understand. But it would really help with the finances. And Emma, you could share the chores, making things easier, right? We won't be living together forever. Let's save up some money and buy a new house in a year or two. Think of it as just putting up with it until then, please, Jack pleaded. His point made some sense. It was difficult to buy our own place right away, and living at his parents' house would allow us to save money. It seemed Jack couldn't stand up to his mother and sister. After thinking it over for a while, I sighed and reluctantly agreed. In hindsight, that decision was a mistake, and I deeply regret it. As soon as we submitted our marriage certificate to the town hall, Jack and I moved into his parents' house. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Now, Emma, you can start by cleaning the bathroom. They've gotten quite dirty, so make sure you scrub them well. My room next, and once you're done cleaning, please take care of the shopping and cooking for dinner, my mother-in-law instructed, catching me off guard. I thought I'd at least get a chance to greet them and relax a bit first. Wait, am I supposed to do all that? I asked, surprised. Of course, that's why we talked about living together in the first place, she replied. Her words left me stunned. They had proposed living together just to dump all the household chores on me. I felt dizzy with the shock of this realization. Jack was in the restroom and missed the whole conversation. When he came back, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law acted as if nothing had happened, simply saying, well then, take care, and disappearing into their rooms. I couldn't bring myself to tell Jack what had just transpired. We had just gotten married, and I didn't want to start off by speaking ill of his family. What's wrong? He'd asked. Nothing, I replied. I should have told Jack right then what his mother and sister had said, but pride and an attempt to be considerate stopped me. That decision would come back to haunt me. Living at my in-laws' house soon became overwhelming. As expected, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law pushed all the household chores onto me. Emma, you can come home on time from work, can't you? I can't do household chores because of my bad legs, my mother-in-law said. Yes, and I'm a nurse, so my work hours are irregular, my sister-in-law added. We used to have a housekeeper, but she couldn't come anymore because of other commitments. It's a relief that you're here, Emma. It was clear they planned to exploit me. Please wait, I have work too. I can leave at regular hours some days, but it gets really busy during peak times. Why don't we all share the household chores? The same conditions apply to Jack. You can do chores that are easier on your legs. If the four of us share, it'll significantly reduce the burden on each person, right? I proposed, thinking it was a fair and constructive solution. What? Why are you deciding how to divide the chores in this house? My sister-in-law snapped. That's right, I've told you I can't do anything because my legs hurt. This is why people raised in orphanages are clueless, my mother-in-law added. Their harsh words silenced me. My silence was taken as defeat, and I ended up responsible for all the household chores. Every day after that was hell. Not only did I have to do all the work, but they also nitpicked everything I did, from the food I cooked to the cleaning. Emma, your cooking is too bland. Is this the kind of bad food they fed you in the orphanage? They sneered. Did you clean the bathroom yesterday? I found a hair. They continued, finding fault with even the smallest things. You're eating off our money, so it's only natural you do at least this much right, my mother-in-law said one day. That was the final straw. With all due respect, I also work and contribute financially to this household. Shouldn't we all be equal in this? I argued. You call that work? All you do is tap on a computer. It's not like you're dealing with life or death situations like me, my sister-in-law sneered, her face twisted in mockery. Sure, my job as a web designer might not be as nerve-wracking as nursing, but dismissing it as just tapping on a computer was insulting. However, I knew that arguing back would only escalate the situation, so I bit my tongue. Oh, and Emma, you went to the cafe near the station after work yesterday, didn't you? My mother-in-law suddenly said. I was taken aback. I had gone to the cafe, but how did she know? Sorry about that. I had a GPS tracker put on your phone, so I know everything you do, she said nonchalantly. I was stunned by her revelation. GPS? Why would you do something like that? I asked, bewildered. It was clear they weren't content with just tormenting me at home. They had resorted to tracking my every move. Of course, it's to monitor your activities, she replied smugly. Unbelievable. I pulled out my phone and tried to disable the GPS, but no matter what I did, I couldn't turn it off. It's useless. I've locked it with a password. But it's fine, isn't it? Just don't do anything suspicious, and you'll be okay. Her words were infuriating. The issue wasn't about being suspicious, it was about my privacy. I considered buying a new phone, but it seemed ridiculous to spend money because of my in-laws' actions. My mental state was on the brink. Jack seemed to realize his mother and sister were mistreating me, but his timid nature prevented him from standing up to them. Although Jack initially suggested saving up and moving out, my in-laws were spending the money I earned. It seemed like we might never save enough to leave, trapping me in this house forever. The mere thought was terrifying. Unable to bear it any longer, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a while when no one was around. It had been some time, so I expected them to be surprised. I was at my limit and needed help. As I listened to the ringtone, I prayed they would answer. After about 5 rings, they picked up. Relieved, I greeted them with a long time no see and began to share my troubles. They were initially shocked but offered their support. As I spoke, tears streamed down my cheeks, and I kept saying, "Thank you," over and over. 3 months passed. During that time, being tracked by GPS, I would get accused of using errands as an excuse to skip chores or secretly meet a man. I tried to ignore their baseless accusations. Jack attempted to stand up to his mother and sister by saying, "Stop it," but he always shrank under their glares. It seemed he had been under their control since childhood. Realizing this, I stopped hoping that Jack would save me. Though I still loved him, living with his mother and sister made it hard to understand my own feelings. Then, one day, I had to attend a company training session, which required me to be away overnight. The thought of not having to return to my in-laws' house, even if just for work, made my heart leap. During the training, my colleagues commented on how relaxed I seemed, making me realize just how stressful my home life had become. The overnight training ended in a blink, and I wished it could have lasted another week. On the second day, we were dismissed early, around 3:00 p.m. Feeling dejected, I returned home and immediately noticed a pile of luggage at the entrance. "What's this?" I muttered to myself. The luggage was scattered haphazardly, and upon closer inspection, I saw my clothes and beloved pillow among the items. It was all my stuff. As I stood there, stunned, the front door suddenly flung open. "Get out, you parasite!" my mother-in-law yelled. Her voice pierced my ears as I stared blankly at my belongings tossed at the entrance. Seeing the demonic look on her face, I understood everything. My sister-in-law also appeared behind her, a cold sweat running down my back. Considering the time, Jack wasn't home yet, which meant these two were trying to drive me out without him knowing. "Don't ever come near my brother again," my sister-in-law sneered, exchanging a triumphant smile with my mother-in-law. I looked around, but there wasn't a single passerby in sight. I felt like a frog being stared down by a snake. Swallowing hard, I said, "I'll be gone in an hour," mustering all my strength to sound confident and not let my voice tremble. It was a gamble. I pulled out my phone and called someone I trusted, my high school teacher, Daniel. Daniel had been a great support to me, especially as an orphan with no relatives. He had stayed in touch even after I graduated, always telling me to reach out if I was in trouble. As I made the call, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law glared at me, but I ignored them and told Daniel, "I'm being driven out by my in-laws. I need help." It felt burdensome to ask, but since I couldn't rely on Jack, Daniel was my only option. After listening to my story, Daniel simply said, "All right," and hung up. My in-laws sneered, "Who did you call? You don't even have a family. The cavalry you're expecting won't come." But I said nothing in return, just stood there motionlessly. Eventually, they grew impatient and went back inside. I believed Daniel would come and waited for about an hour. Then, to my surprise, a luxury car approached, its engine humming loudly. My eyes widened in astonishment. Perhaps alerted by the sound, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law peeked out from the entrance. "What is that? Isn't that a luxury car worth $400,000? My sister-in-law exclaimed, astonished. Daniel arrived in a relaxed tone, smiling gently as he stepped out of the driver's seat. "Hey, sorry to keep you waiting," he said, just as calm and kind as always. "I'm so sorry for calling you out of the blue." "Thank you so much," I said, getting into Daniel's car. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law stared at me, dumbfounded. "Emma has been a great help to us. I'd like to say goodbye now, but first, please take this," Daniel said, handing me a piece of paper, a divorce paper. He passed it to me, and I looked at him, nodding firmly. I quickly filled out my information right then and there, stepped out of the car, and handed it to my mother-in-law. "I am divorcing Jack. I love him, but I can no longer associate with you. Please pass on my regards to him." I spoke clearly, leaving my stunned in-laws behind as we swiftly drove off. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother-in-law and sister-in-law shouting something, but I ignored their voices and turned to Daniel. "Thank you so much," I said. "Oh, this is nothing. I have something even better prepared for you," Daniel replied. I was confused, not understanding what he meant. After a 30-minute drive, we arrived at Daniel's house. "We're here," he announced. I looked at the grand house with a magnificent gate, almost like a castle. "Is this your house, Daniel?" I asked, astonished. "Yes, I recently bought it," he said. I recalled that he had lived in a smaller house before. "Didn't you buy another house before?" I asked. He nodded, explaining, "I sold that one. I wanted something bigger." Daniel led me inside. The house was spacious and filled with luxurious furniture. I was amazed. Then Daniel said seriously, "Actually, Emma, I've been thinking, would you like to live here with me?" I was speechless, taken aback by his proposal. He continued, "I've been worried about you since you told me about your troubles. You used to come to me with concerns during high school and sometimes even after you started working. We haven't been in touch much lately, but I've always been concerned. It's like I'm your parent, but I'm not your parent, Emma." As he spoke, the doorbell rang, echoing throughout the house. I flinched, and Daniel quickly headed toward the entrance. When he opened the heavy front door, I was shocked to see my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and even Jack glaring at us. Jack looked anxious and avoided eye contact. "Oh, Emma, so this is where you've been. What's all this with such a grand house?" My mother-in-law sneered. I realized they had followed me here using the GPS tracker on my phone. "Jack must have been brought here after work. Is there something you need?" I asked, trying not to show my nervousness, though sweat was pouring from my palms. "Yes, there is. You ran off in a luxury car, and now you're in this beautiful house." "Explain this," my sister-in-law demanded. It was clear they were jealous, having intended for me to feel miserable after being driven out. They had no right to demand explanations. "There's nothing to explain. This is Daniel's house. He gave me a ride and brought me here," I said, but my explanation didn't convince them. They responded with a skeptical "huh." Seeing our discomfort, Daniel stepped forward confidently. "From today, this house is mine and Emma's. Outsiders, please do not enter." Their shocked reactions matched my own disbelief. "What do you mean by that? So Emma gets to live in such a grand house? You must be joking." "We always wanted you to be miserable," my sister-in-law blurted out, revealing her true feelings. It became clear that they had always enjoyed tormenting me, pushing me to the limit until they could discard me. Jack tried to speak up, saying, "Hey, you two are going too far," but a glance from his mother silenced him. He really was a weak man. Turning to Daniel, I'd asked, "What do you mean by our home?" I tried to make sense of everything in my confused state. Daniel looked at me and smiled warmly. "Just as I said, I actually own much of the land around here. I have plenty of land and money, so I've been thinking about adopting you and passing on my assets to you." His revelation made my eyes widen. A landowner passing on assets seemed unbelievable. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law appeared equally shocked, knowing I had grown up in an orphanage. They likely relished the idea of me being left out in the cold. But then Daniel, this mysterious figure, offered to adopt me. I was stunned. Daniel continued, "Actually, I owe a lot to your parents. When I first became a teacher, they were colleagues who supported me when I was relentlessly bullied by a superior. They helped me while others ignored it. I was close to them ever since. I never imagined they'd pass away so early in an accident. I was really shaken at that time and thought about how I could honor their memory. When I learned you were attending the same high school where I worked, I made it a point to reach out to you, maybe too eagerly." Hearing Daniel's confession surprised and delighted me. I barely remembered my parents, but knowing they were such warm people touched my heart. "That's why I was happy when you came to me for help this time. I bought this house thinking a day might come when you'd need a place to stay, but I didn't expect it to be so soon." Daniel's glare shifted to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, making even me shiver. "Please stop following her. If you try to take away her happiness, I will not forgive you. I will pursue every legal avenue to protect her. And you," he turned to Jack, "should have protected her but did nothing. You don't deserve to be with Emma. Now, please leave." Daniel's voice echoed powerfully through the entrance. "I don't want to be part of your family anymore," I said, finally finding the courage. "You've treated me like a slave from the start, thinking you found a convenient woman. You will never understand the pain and suffering you've caused me. Jack, I did love you, but I love myself more. Goodbye." With Daniel's support, I finally voiced what I had long held back. The three of them began to tremble. "Remember this, I will make you regret this one day. You will suffer," my mother-in-law threatened. They spat out various lines before hastily retreating. Feeling like I might collapse, I took a deep breath and looked at Daniel. He gazed at me warmly. "Daniel, thank you so much. I don't know how to thank you enough," I said. "No need to thank me. I've always cared about you, being the daughter of my benefactors," Daniel replied with a kind smile. I felt a sense of relief and salvation. "About the adoption, if you're uncomfortable, it's okay," Daniel said, waving his hand dismissively. "I thought it would be the quickest way to transfer my assets to you. I don't plan on getting married again, and it would fulfill my wish." Daniel seemed like a godsend, endlessly kind. I agreed to think about the adoption but was eager to enjoy the newfound freedom. 2 weeks later, an unexpected situation arose. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were arrested. They had been caught wearing all black and acting suspiciously near Daniel's house. It turned out they had been trying to break in to commit burglary, thinking they could turn their fortunes around by stealing valuables. But their plan ended miserably, with them being arrested. Jack is now living alone in the in-law house. In the end, Jack and I divorced. The fact that he didn't protect me when I needed it most hurt the most. If I ever consider marrying again, I'll make sure to find someone who truly values me. Now, I'm living comfortably in Daniel's house. We've agreed to proceed with the adoption. I initially felt guilty, but Daniel had been lonely living alone. I'm truly happy now, living with Daniel, who I regard as my real father. I've also cancelled my old phone and replaced it with a new one, free from the fear of being tracked. I'm determined to work hard to repay Daniel's kindness and have vowed never to go through such an experience again.
My name is Diana, and once upon a time, I believed I was living the dream. You know the kind I mean. White picket fence, loving husband, 2.5 kids on the horizon. Essentially a life straight out of a romantic drama. The man responsible for painting this idyllic picture was Derek. Derek, with his chiseled jawline, sparkling eyes, and effortless charm. He was everyone's dream guy, including mine. I met him during my last year in college, and it was love at first sight, or at least it felt that way. Derek was a natural romantic. He knew just the right words to say, the perfect gestures to make. Within a year, we were engaged, and a year after that, I was walking down the aisle in a flowing white gown, beaming at the man I thought would be my forever. "Ready to be my wife," Derek whispered as we stood in front of the altar, his eyes shining with what I took for love. "More than ready," I replied, feeling a tear of happiness slide down my cheek. The wedding was gorgeous. We had roses everywhere, strings of fairy lights illuminating the room, and a jazz band that played our favorite songs. Our families were elated, our friends envious, and I felt like the happiest woman alive. But among the sea of smiling faces, there was one that never reached the eyes, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. During the reception, she sidled up to me with a glass of champagne in her hand and an unsettling smirk on her face. "Diana, dear," she cooed, "such a lovely event. Though you could have chosen a better flower arrangement, don't you think? Roses are so pedestrian." I was taken aback, but I kept my smile intact. "Well, I always thought roses were timeless," I said, trying not to let her see how much her words had stung. "Timeless or cliched? It's a thin line, my dear," she retorted before sauntering off to schmooze with other guests. That was the first red flag, but like any bride basking in the glow of her wedding day, I chose to ignore it. It was easier to focus on Derek's adoring gaze, the cheer of our families and friends, and the dreamy atmosphere that had enveloped the day. I convinced myself that it didn't matter what my mother-in-law thought. What mattered was the man I had just married and the life we were about to build together. Yet even as we jetted off to our honeymoon, her barbed words kept creeping into my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the glossy surface of our picture-perfect life, something was rotting away. Like a little scratch on a shiny new car, my mother-in-law's attitude was a flaw in an otherwise pristine landscape. How big a flaw? I didn't realize at that time as we touched down in Bali for what would be a honeymoon filled with sunset and romance. I buried those nagging thoughts deep down. I was determined to focus on the good, on the love story that felt like it was written in the stars. If only I knew then what I know now, that some stars are destined to fall and some facades, no matter how beautiful, are built on shaky foundations. After the honeymoon, life was bliss, or at least I believed it to be. Derek and I settled into our cozy suburban home, a 2-story abode with a lawn we dreamed our future kids would play on. The initial months were the honeymoon phase magnified. We were that annoying couple, always holding hands, always gazing into each other's eyes. It was, in a word, perfect. However, my career began to take off. I got promoted twice in a year, my work earning me accolades and a pretty good salary. Derek, on the other hand, seemed to be stuck in a rut. His job was steady, but unlike me, he didn't seem to be moving up the ladder. One night during dinner, the elephant in the room decided to make itself known. Derek looked up from his plate, his eyes not meeting mine, and asked, "So, how was your meeting with the board today?" "It went well," I replied, cautiously optimistic. They were impressed with my presentation. There's even talk about another promotion. "That's nice," Derek said, but his eyes were clouded, his smile a touch too tight. "You don't seem too happy," I pressed. "Is something wrong?" "It's just, don't you think you're getting too engrossed in your work? We hardly spend time together anymore." That comment didn't sit well with me, but I tried to diffuse the tension. "I know, but these opportunities won't come twice. We both have to make sacrifices for our future, right?" "Yeah, sure," Derek mumbled, finishing his meal. Inside, silence. The air grew thick between us, yet we carried on like everything was fine, ignoring the fissure that had just cracked open in our lives. As if picking up on our issues, my mother-in-law began visiting more often. At first, it was once every few weeks. "So what's the plan then?" Derek asked, his voice tinged with a trepidation that made my heart sink further. "Simple. In 3 days, we put our plan into motion. I'll pretend to get violently ill after eating dinner here. We'll claim that Diana poisoned me," my mother-in-law stated matter-of-factly. My knees nearly buckled. Were they really plotting what I thought they were plotting? "Derek, are you sure about this?" I managed to press, my voice trembling. "We've discussed this, Mom. I can't let her outshine me anymore. I can't let her take everything away from me. It's my turn to lead, and I want what she has," Derek asserted. "And you'll have it," she assured him. "Once she's out of the picture, you can claim her assets. Her money will be your money, and people will finally see you for the successful man you ought to be." I felt as if the floor had been yanked out from under me. This was not a mere difference in personality or ambition between me and my husband. This was a calculated, malicious plot to sabotage me, to rob me of my life and achievements. My first instinct was to burst into the room, confront them both, and tear my marriage apart right there. But a second thought held me back. If I confronted them now, they would just deny it, and I'd have no proof. I needed irrefutable evidence to bring them down, and luckily, I had 3 days to get it. With my heart pounding in my chest, I quietly retreated, picking up my heels in my hands and tiptoeing back out the front door. I got back into my car, drove around the block, and then returned home, this time making sure to make my presence overtly known. "Hey, I'm home," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady as I walked back in. Derek and his mother greeted me with forced smiles, unaware that I had overheard their vile plot. It was a game of deception, and the stakes had never been higher. But now that I knew what I was up against, I was ready to turn the tables. They had 3 days to finalize their plot, and I had the same amount of time to unravel it, piece by damning piece. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of plotting and planning. Every moment was a ticking clock, reminding me that my world could come crashing down if I didn't act swiftly and smartly. My first move was to contact a friend who worked in law enforcement. Without divulging too many details, I explained that I suspected someone might attempt to harm me and inquired about how to collect evidence. "Wiretaps and hidden cameras are tricky due to consent laws," he said cautiously. "But you could keep your phone on and record conversations." I thanked him and mulled over the idea. Recording a conversation without consent was illegal in some places, but right now, I felt cornered. It was my word against theirs, so I decided to take the calculated risk. The day of the planned incident came quickly. I could feel my pulse racing the entire day, but I put on the facade of an ignorant, happy wife. Derek and his mother arrived around 6 p.m., the tension in the air so thick you could cut it with a knife. But I pushed forward, serving them with a bright smile as though nothing were amiss. Before entering the dining room, I surreptitiously activated the voice recorder on my phone and placed it discreetly under a stack of napkins on the buffet table. "So, shall we begin?" I said, motioning for them to take their seats. "Absolutely, darling. Everything looks wonderful." Derek smiled back, but his eyes had a glint that I now recognized as deception. I served the first course, a creamy tomato soup that I'd made dozens of times before. As they took their first spoonfuls, my mother-in-law suddenly began to choke and cough violently, clutching her chest and collapsing onto the floor. "Diana, what have you done?" Derek yelled, his eyes wide with feigned disbelief as he reached for his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No need for that," I replied, my gaze icy cold. Just at that moment, the front door burst open. Police officers rushed into the room, pointing at Derek. "Police, drop your phone and put your hands where we can see them." Derek looked bewildered, his gaze shifting frantically between me and the officers. "What is this, Diana?" As the police handcuffed him and his melodramatic mother, who suddenly seemed quite fit, I retrieved my phone and stopped the recording. "This," I said, holding up the phone, "is evidence." As it turned out, my law enforcement friend had taken my fears more seriously than I thought. He had kept an eye on my residence, and upon seeing my coded text that I'd sent just before dinner, had dispatched officers to my home, suspecting foul play. Derek and his mother were dumbfounded. Their plan had backfired spectacularly, and the recording was the final nail in the coffin. As they were let out of my home, their faces etched with the realization that they had lost, I couldn't help but think how swiftly the tables had turned. It was a gamble, one that could have endangered my own legality, but in the end, it had paid off. But it was a calculated risk I had to take to expose the venomous snakes I've been sharing my life with. Now, they were the ones facing the consequences of their actions, and as for me, I felt a sense of vindication tinged with the bittersweetness of a life-altering revelation. I had unmasked the villains in my story, but there was still much to be done. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The days following the arrest were a blur of legal consultations, paperwork, and emotional turbulence. Even though I had collected evidence, my heart would still race whenever I thought about the courtroom. Our entire lives would be aired like dirty laundry for everyone to see, yet I had to steel myself for the confrontation. When the trial began, I felt like I was stepping into a different universe. The sterile courtroom, the gravity of the judge's stare, the lawyers pacing and firing questions, it was overwhelming. My lawyer had prepped me well, but nothing could prepare me for the moment when I'd have to face Derek and his mother in court. "Diana, is it true that you've been unhappy in your marriage?" Derek's lawyer sneered, trying to paint a narrative where I would be incentivized to frame them. "Unhappiness in a marriage doesn't justify criminal actions," I retorted, holding his gaze. The room seemed to hold its breath. When the recording was played, you could hear a pin drop as Derek and his mother's plotting voices filled the room. When it stopped, the silence was deafening. "Derek, do you recognize that voice?" the prosecutor asked. Derek hesitated. It sounds like me, but this is a setup." "She manipulated that recording," he claimed. "My son would never do something like this." "Diana is just trying to ruin him," his mother chimed in. Then it was my turn. My lawyer asked, "Diana, how did you obtain this recording?" I suspected foul play and took measures to protect myself. I replied, keeping my tone steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The jury took less than an hour to come back with the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Derek and his mother received a 4-year sentence for attempted fraud. As the judge announced the sentence, I looked over at Derek. His face was ashen, and his mother was beside herself. That night, I sat alone in the house that had once been the symbol of my marital dreams. I signed the divorce papers and left them on the kitchen table for my lawyer to collect the next day. For so long, this place had been a war zone, fraught with tension and deceit. Now, it was just a house empty and echoing but filled with the promise of a new beginning. I got a notification on my phone. It was an email from my office. The board had decided to promote me to a senior executive role, a position that had been in discussion for weeks but was now finalized. A position that would have probably gone to someone else had my life been appended by Derek's plot. It struck me then how close I had come to losing everything: my career, my reputation, my freedom. But instead, the tables had turned. Derek and his mother were behind bars, and I was here, standing stronger than ever. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down, taking in the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. I had taken control of my story, and while the road ahead would be filled with new challenges and uncertainties, I had turned a decisive page. The divorce proceedings went by swiftly, expedited by the criminal charges that had been levied against Derek and his mother. Within a month, it was finalized, and my lawyer handed me the papers with a somber yet triumphant look on her face. "You're free now, Diana," she said, packing her briefcase. "What are you planning to do next?" "I think it's time to write a new chapter in my life, one that doesn't include Derek or anyone else who wishes me harm," I replied, taking a deep breath as if to absorb my newfound freedom. My career blossomed in the following months. I took over significant projects and led teams to success. The company recognized my efforts, and I felt truly fulfilled for the first time in years. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the final chapter of my past was yet to be written. Derek and his mother were due to be released soon, their sentences reduced for good behavior. While they couldn't touch me legally, I wanted them to know that they had picked the wrong person to mess with. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. A mutual friend, a real estate agent, told me about a property that Derek had always coveted, a beautiful isolated lake house that he dreamed of buying for years. But given the divorce and his tarnished reputation, it was well out of his reach. On impulse, I bought it. My name is Olivia. If you had asked me a couple of years ago how I imagined my wedding day, I would have painted you a picture filled with love, warmth, and a groom who looked at me like I was his universe. As fate would have it, my reality didn't quite align with my expectations. I stood at the altar about to say my vows to a man who seemed like a perfect match on paper. Adam, an average guy with an average job who charmed me with his seemingly kind-natured and sense of humor. I wore a gown that took my breath away every time I looked in the mirror. Elegant yet understated, much like how I saw myself. My father had just walked me down the aisle, a moment we had both anticipated since I was a little girl. He kissed me on the cheek and took his seat next to my mother, who was already wiping away tears of joy. I turned to look at Adam. He was dressed in a traditional black tuxedo, but there was a look in his eyes that unsettled me, a distant, almost vacant gaze that failed to mirror the enthusiasm of everyone else in the room. "You look beautiful," he whispered to me, but his voice lacked conviction. I forced a smile and softly asked, "Are you okay, Adam? You seem a little off," he shrugged. "I'm fine, just a lot on my mind. Weddings are stressful, you know." I nodded, not wanting to create a scene. I took a deep breath as we turned to face the priest. The ceremony began, and my mind started drifting despite myself. Was I making a mistake? Was the subtle tension in Adam's voice a prelude to a life of hardship and disappointment? As the priest spoke, my mind was awash with questions I couldn't answer. "Do you, Olivia, take Adam to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the priest intoned. "I do," I said, my voice tinged with hope that perhaps this was all a figment of my overactive imagination. "And do you, Adam, take Olivia to be your lawfully wedded wife?" There was a brief pause. The congregation held its collective breath, and for a moment, I saw my life flash before my eyes. Finally, he responded, "I do," but the words seemed to stick in his throat. The priest announced, "You may now kiss the bride." As our lips met, the room erupted in applause, but I felt a strange emptiness. Something was amiss, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The celebration moved to the reception hall, filled with laughter, dance, and toasts to a happy life ahead. Yet, amid the clinking of champagne glasses and well wishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man I had just married was a stranger to me. We mingled with guests, smiling for photos, but every time I glanced at Adam, he seemed lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" I finally asked him as we sat at our head table. "Nothing much, just a lot to process, you know," he replied, dodging the question once more. That night, as we drove away in a car adorned with just married signs and tin cans rattling behind us, I looked at my new husband. He was staring out of the window, lost in a world of his own, and for the first time, I felt a pang of dread about the life I had just committed myself to. But like any optimist trapped in a romantic ideal, I told myself things would get better, not knowing that this was just the first chapter in a long tale of deception, heartbreak, and ultimate retribution following the wedding. We moved into my house, a spacious place I had bought before we met, owing to my stable, high-paying job. Adam, a regular office worker, didn't earn much, but I was never one to judge a man by his paycheck. My philosophy was that love and compatibility mattered far more than financial equations. For a while, everything seemed to align with that utopian belief. Initially, Adam seemed like the perfect partner. He was affectionate, at least superficially, and took an active interest in my work, asking how my day was and even surprising me with dinner once or twice. But as days turned into weeks, the veneer began to wear off. "You're late again," I would remark as he stumbled through the door close to midnight, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Yeah, the office is getting hectic. You know how it is," he'd reply, avoiding my eyes as he quickly made his way to the bathroom, presumably to wash off the evidence of whatever he had really been doing. It was the 5th time he'd come home late in 2 weeks, and this time he looked particularly disheveled. I decided to probe a little deeper. "Adam, is there something going on at work? You've been coming home late so often. I'm getting worried." He sighed as if annoyed by the question. "Look, Olivia, you wouldn't understand. It's office politics, meetings, deadlines. Don't stress over it." His dismissal didn't sit well with me. I have deadlines too, you know. I manage a whole team, but I still try to maintain a balance. Isn't that what we should both be striving for? Adam rolled his eyes. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Just let it go." The word nothing echoed in my head, amplifying my growing suspicions. I had always been perceptive, a quality that had gotten me far in my career. I could read people, get a sense of their motivations, their sincerity or lack thereof. That sense was tingling now more strongly than it had on our wedding day, but I chose to suppress it. Maybe it was pride or perhaps a simple, naive belief that love could overcome all obstacles. Whatever it was, it blinded me to the glaring red flags that were popping up around me. The man whom I had allowed to be my partner in sickness and in health was slowly becoming a stranger. His late nights at the office grew more frequent, and so did his irritability. The laughter and easy conversations that had once filled our home were gradually replaced by a tense silence. I found myself walking on eggshells, choosing my words carefully to avoid igniting another argument over the smallest of issues. Our physical intimacy dwindled too. Adam always had an excuse, whether it was stress from work or just plain exhaustion. But the worst part was the emotional disconnect. The man who had once talked about growing old with me seemed increasingly disinterested in even discussing how our day went. I didn't know then what was unraveling before me, but what was clear was that our honeymoon phase had unceremoniously ended, giving way to a harsh reality that I was yet to fully comprehend. When the 2 lines appeared on the pregnancy test, a surge of emotions overwhelmed me. I was excited, terrified, but most of all, hopeful. The idea of bringing new life into the world with Adam made my heart swell. I thought, maybe just maybe, this miracle would be the catalyst that reignited the love and affection that seemed to have dwindled between us. I waited for him to get home, rehearsing how I would break the news. I imagined his eyes lighting up, mirroring the joy I felt. I was so lost in these musings that I didn't hear him come in. When I finally realized he was there, sitting on the couch flipping through TV channels, I approached him with the pregnancy test hidden behind my back. Adam, can you turn off the TV for a second? I have something important to tell you, I said. He sighed and put the remote down. What is it now? With shaking hands, I revealed the pregnancy test. We're going to have a baby, Adam. Actually, babies. The doctor confirmed it's twins. The room fell silent. The expression on Adam's face was not what I had envisioned. Instead of joy or even a simple smile, what I saw was a strange mix of incredulity and, to my shock, annoyance. Twins? Are you sure? He finally said, breaking the silence that had thickened the air between us. Yes, the ultrasound confirmed it. Isn't it wonderful? I replied, my voice cracking as I sought to find some semblance of the happy reaction I had expected. His eyes narrowed as he spoke. Great, more mouths to feed. Those words landed like a punch in the gut. I stood there, staring at the man who was supposed to be my life partner, trying to understand how he could react so coldly to something so monumental. Adam, what's going on? This should be happy news for both of us. Why are you acting like it's the end of the world? I asked. Adam slumped back on the couch, running his fingers through his hair as if weighed down by some unbearable burden. Look, Olivia, this is a big deal. It's not just a happy new situation, it changes everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Changes everything. You make it sound like our lives are ruined. These are our children, Adam, our family. He looked at me, his eyes void of the warmth and affection that had drawn me to him in the first place. I need time to process this, okay? I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak, as I walked away. I couldn't help but feel that the unwanted miracle of our unborn twins had just magnified the widening rift between us. For the first time, I began to truly worry about the kind of father Adam would be, the kind of family we would become. I went to bed that night, my mind swirling with a storm of uncertainties. The excitement I had initially felt was now tainted by Adam's unsettling reaction. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my hand instinctively going to my still flat belly. Am I bringing my children into a broken home? I wondered. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Adam snoring softly beside me, emotionally distant as ever. The enormity of my situation settled over me like a dark cloud, and I found myself questioning not just my marriage, but the life that was growing inside me. It was the miracle I had always dreamed of, but one that had distressingly underscored the disquieting truth about the man lying next to me. The weeks following the revelation of my pregnancy were far from the blissful, love-filled days I had once fantasized about. As my belly grew, so did the chasm between Adam and me. The man who had promised to be my rock, my partner in this incredible journey, was nowhere to be found emotionally or sometimes even physically. As my pregnancy advanced, the housework began to pile up. Floors needed sweeping, dishes gathered in the sink, and laundry formed an untamed mountain. One day, after I'd spent an exhausting day at work, Adam strolled into the living room, kicked his shoes off, and plopped onto the couch. Adam, can you please at least put your shoes away? I asked, struggling to keep the fatigue out of my voice. He scoffed. You're home all day. Why can't you do it? I was at work, Adam, and I'm carrying twins. A little help wouldn't hurt, I pleaded. He looked at me as if scrutinizing my words and then let out an exasperated sigh. Olivia, I don't have time for this. I've got to leave for another business meeting. Another one? You've been away for the last 3 nights. When do you plan on helping around here? I questioned. When you stop complaining, he retorted, grabbing his coat and heading for the door. The days became a series of these confrontations, each one more bitter than the last. His late nights grew more frequent, and when he was home, he became increasingly irritable. Arguments erupted over the most trivial matters, and more than once, he seemed almost disdainful of my pregnancy, as if it was an inconvenience he hadn't signed up for. It all came to a head one chilly fall day when Adam declared that the garden needed cleaning, and it was my job to do it. Despite being visibly pregnant and the temperature dipping, he locked me outside to make sure the work got done. I can't believe you're doing this, Adam. It's freezing, and I'm pregnant. I protested. You'll manage. It's not rocket science, he snorted, locking the sliding door behind him. While I was outside, teeth chattering and hands soiled from the work, I noticed through the window that Adam was packing a suitcase. I have to go on a week-long business trip, he said curtly when he finally let me back in, ignoring my disheveled, frozen state. You can handle things here, can't you? He asked, not waiting for an answer before leaving. During his absence, I stumbled upon the grim reality that half his belongings were missing. I scoured the house in panic and discovered the safe was empty. A total of $250,000 I had saved up over the years had vanished. My calls to him went unanswered. That was the last straw. As I sat there surrounded by the life we had supposedly built together, the walls felt like they were closing in on me. I was overwhelmed by a cascade of feelings: betrayal, hurt, but mostly a simmering, righteous anger. It was time to accept that our relationship was not a two-way street. It was a dead end, and I was the only one who had been bringing anything to the table: the love, the support, and now even my hard-earned money. It had all been siphoned off by the man I had entrusted with my heart. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the storm that was about to come. It was time to change the rules of this twisted game. It was time for me to take back control of my life and, more importantly, secure a future for the lives growing inside me. Little did Adam know, he had just ignited a fuse, and I was about to explode in a way he never saw coming. As the week crawled on, each day felt like a lifetime. But I wasn't idle. I was plotting. Adam had taken advantage of my love, my trust, and my resources. He had turned his back on me at the most vulnerable point in my life. But he'd forgotten one critical thing. I was his boss's daughter, and he was still on the company payroll. I arranged a meeting with my father and walked into his office with a file of evidence I had collected: late-night texts with unidentified numbers, receipts for luxury hotel stays when he was supposedly working late, and most importantly, bank statements that highlighted the missing $250,000. Dad, we need to talk about Adam, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within me. My father looked up, concern etching his features. What's going on, Olivia? I handed him the file. He's been cheating, lying, and he's stolen from our safe. He can't continue to work here. My father leafed through the papers, his eyes narrowing with each page. This is serious, Olivia. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure about anything. He needs to go, Dad, not just from my life, but from this company. My father sighed, his hand rubbing the bridge of his nose. All right, I'll handle it from here. He won't set foot in this office again. Thank you, Dad, I said, feeling the first wave of relief wash over me. The next part of my plan was to secure my financial and legal standing. I contacted the police and formally reported the theft. I knew it would be a long process, but the wheels of justice were finally in motion. When Adam returned a week later, drunk and in the company of a strange woman, I was ready. The house was locked, and I had packed his remaining belongings in a box that sat outside the front door. What the hell is this, Olivia? He yelled, banging on the door, his words slurring. I'd opened the door a crack, not allowing him to enter. It's over, Adam. You're fired from your job. I've reported the theft, and I want you out of my life. His eyes widened in disbelief, quickly turning into fury. You can't do this to me. Before I could react, he punched me in the face. Pain exploded across my cheek, but it was overshadowed by a surge of adrenaline and resolve. That's assault, Adam. Another charge to add to your growing list, I said, my voice steady despite the pain. His face paled, realizing the gravity of his actions. You're going to regret this, Olivia. I already regret ever meeting you. Now get out, I said firmly. He picked up the box, glaring at me one last time before stumbling away into the night. As I closed the door, my body shaking from the confrontation, I realized that this was just the beginning. Adam had unleashed a side of me he'd never expected to see, and now he would face the consequences of his actions. I touched my swelling belly, making a silent promise to my unborn children. Their mother was no pushover, and their father would soon understand the extent of his mistakes. Revenge had only just begun, and I was far from done. I had the law on my side, a supportive family, and a fierce maternal instinct that would stop at nothing to protect my future world. Adam had underestimated me for the last time, and as I went through the motions to legally dissolve our marriage, press charges, and reclaim what was mine, I knew one thing for sure. The hunter had become the hunted, and I was not going to miss my shot. The courtroom was cold, sterile, a fitting arena for the final chapter of a marriage that had turned just as icy. I was seated next to my attorney, files and evidence laid neatly on the table in front of us. Across the room was Adam, disheveled and visibly nervous, flanked by his own legal counsel. "Mrs. Olivia Davis, you may present your case," the judge intoned, turning toward me with a nod. My attorney began laying out the chain of events, punctuated by irrefutable evidence, text messages, financial statements, and even medical records documenting the physical abuse. "How do you plead to these allegations, Mr. Adam Davis?" the judge asked, his gaze shifting across the room. Adam's attorney whispered something in his ear before replying, "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to these allegations." The audacity boiled my blood, but I remained calm, composed. This was a battle I was more than prepared for. "Very well, proceed with your arguments," the judge instructed. Over the next hour, each side presented their case. Adam's lawyer tried to paint me as an overreacting, controlling spouse. They questioned the authenticity of the texts and claimed the missing money was used for joint household expenses, a blatant lie. Finally, it was my turn for the rebuttal. "Your Honor, I would like to call Mr. Adam Davis to the stand." Adam looked visibly shaken but complied, swearing on the Bible before sitting. "Mr. Davis, you claim the $250,000 missing from our joint account was for household expenses. Can you please provide any evidence or receipts validating that claim?" He stammered, I don't have them with me right now." "Isn't it true that you have been staying at luxury hotels when you claim to be on business trips? Isn't it true that you have been engaged in extramarital affairs during our marriage?" Adam glanced nervously at his lawyer, who signaled him to remain quiet. "So you refuse to answer?" I pressed. The room hung heavy with tension. The judge broke the silence. "Your silence speaks volumes, Mr. Davis." After what seemed like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. "Given the overwhelming evidence presented by Mrs. Davis, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Davis, you are hereby required to pay $500,000 in damages for emotional and physical abuse, as well as for the theft of marital assets. This court also grants Mrs. Davis full custody of the unborn children. The marriage between Olivia and Adam Davis is officially dissolved." As the gavel came crashing down, so did the wall that had been suffocating me for months. I looked across the room at Adam, his face a mixture of disbelief and defeat. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said, my voice unwavering, finally free from the shackles of a loveless, toxic marriage. As I walked out of the courtroom, a new chapter in my life was about to begin. Adam had underestimated me, belittled me, and tried to break me. But I emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. The woman walking out of that courtroom was not the same one who had walked in, and she was never looking back. The battle was won, but the war had just begun, and this time, I was armed not just with the law, but with the fiercest weapon of all, unyielding resolve. I had 2 lives growing inside me and a newfound purpose nourishing my soul. My revenge was complete, yet it was only the beginning of a life where I would never again be underestimated. As I stepped out into the crisp air, my lawyer congratulated me. "You did well, Olivia," he said. "No," I replied, touching my belly softly. "We did well." And with that, I walked away, leaving behind a shattered past for a future filled with hope, strength, and most importantly, love for myself and for the beautiful lives I was about to bring into this world. My name is Sarah, a digital artist by profession and a homebody by choice. I take great pride in my work and an equal amount of pride in the small yet cozy house I own. That's why it was so significant for me to take the big step into marriage. The one I chose for this life-altering journey was Mark, a corporate guy with a swagger that could fill a room. He was seemingly perfect, charming, smart, and from a reputable family. I thought I had hit the jackpot. But as the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold, and my wedding was the first place I saw the tarnish on what I thought was a golden life ahead. From the get-go, planning the wedding felt like a struggle for control between me and my soon-to-be mother-in-law, Alice. She was a traditionally minded woman with a propensity for passive-aggressive remarks. She insisted on a lavish, old-fashioned wedding, drowning me in a sea of flower arrangements, table settings, and uncomfortable family traditions. On the day of the wedding, my anxiety was through the roof. I had managed to maintain a cheerful facade, but deep down, I knew something was off. Mark seemed distant, almost like he was a spectator at his own wedding. But what really broke me was Alice's behavior. As I stepped out of the car in my carefully chosen wedding dress, I could feel Alice's eyes on me, scanning me from head to toe. She sauntered over, and in a tone icy enough to give anyone chills, said, "Oh, Sarah, what an ugly shade of white your dress is. It hardly does anything for your complexion." I felt my face flush. It took every ounce of restraint I had to keep a smile plastered on my face. I glanced over at Mark, expecting him to intervene, but he remained silent, staring off into the distance. "Mom, let's just get through the day," he finally said in a tone so dismissive it felt like a slap in the face. Inside, the tension only escalated. Alice seemed determined to find fault with everything, from the music to the food. At one point, she took it upon herself to lecture my little sister on her table manners, a 12-year-old who was already nervous about the big day. "Alice, she's just a child," I intervened, trying to keep my voice steady. "Discipline starts young," she retorted, eyeing me as if I were the one in need of discipline. During the toast, Alice barely masked her disdain. She stood up, glass in hand, and said, "To Sarah and Mark, may you have a life filled with as much joy as this wonderful day." Her eyes met mine, and I knew wonderful was the furthest thing from her mind. Again, I looked to Mark for support. He raised his glass, but said nothing, his eyes avoiding mine, as if the love we professed was a lie we both chose to live. That's when it hit me. I was on my own in this marriage, wedged between a man who refused to stand up for me and a mother-in-law hell-bent on making my life miserable. The day that was supposed to mark the beginning of our happily ever after felt more like the prologue to a grim tale. As we drove off to our honeymoon, me clinging to my bouquet like a shield against the battles to come, I realized that this wedding was an omen, a prelude to the struggle that lay ahead. Mark was physically beside me, but in every way that mattered, I was horribly, dreadfully alone. That's how our marriage started, with the sinister undertones of a wedding that wasn't really a wedding but a theater of pretense. Little did I know that this was just the beginning and worse was yet to come. After the wedding and a strangely muted honeymoon, Mark and I moved into my house. I was thrilled at first. I'd always envisioned married life as an unbroken series of tender moments and shared laughter, a never-ending honeymoon of sorts. How naive I was. I had not accounted for Alice, who seemed to see my house as enemy territory she needed to conquer. Just weeks into our marriage, Alice began visiting regularly, arriving unannounced and pushing open the door as if she owned the place. Each visit was like a whirlwind of criticism and passive-aggressive comments that turned my peaceful abode into a combat zone. On one such occasion, I had just prepared dinner, carefully following a recipe I'd found online. I was excited to share it with Mark, but when Alice just breezed in, she took one look at the meal and scrunched up her nose in disapproval. "Sarah, when will you learn to cook like a real wife?" she said, poking at the lasagna as if it were a science experiment gone wrong. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. "Well, it's a new recipe. I thought Mark might like a change," I said. Alice smirked, Mark has been eating my cooking for years. He won't know what good food is if you keep serving him this slop. At that moment, I expected Mark to stand up for me, to tell his mother that he appreciated my efforts. Instead, he swallowed a bite of lasagna and almost mechanically nodded along with Alice. Mom's got a point, Sarah. The lasagna is a bit dry, he said. I felt my stomach sink. Mark's betrayal was 1,000 times more piercing than Alice's critique. One evening, Alice took it a step further. I had redecorated the living room, putting up new curtains and arranging the furniture in a way that maximized space and comfort. I was rather pleased with the result, but Alice, she had other thoughts. Who chose these curtains? They clash horribly with the furniture, she declared, eyeing the fabric as if it were contaminated. I chose them, actually. I thought they added a bit of color, I responded, my voice shaking more than I would have liked. Color? Is that what you call it? I call it a mess, Alice retorted, chuckling as if she'd said something profoundly witty. Mark, who had been flicking through a magazine, looked up briefly and said, Mom might be onto something, Sarah. Maybe you could use her help in choosing the next set. Of course she could, Alice chimed in, wearing a self-satisfied grin. After all, I have years of experience making a house a home. Her words, delivered in that grating tone of hers, felt like a slap in the face. This was my home, a place I had built long before Mark or Alice stepped into it. Yet it was being colonized one criticism at a time, and the person who was supposed to be my partner in this life journey was aiding and abetting the invasion. It was then that I realized if the man who vowed to stand by me was not just permitting this emotional sabotage. But even then, in that moment of agonizing clarity, I couldn't fathom the depth of my isolation, the extent to which these two people would go to shatter the sanctuary I had built. And so, amidst the battleground that my home was becoming, I kept waiting for things to improve, for Mark to finally take my side, for Alice to get tired of her own bitterness. In hindsight, I should have known better, for the next blow was about to land, a blow that would irrevocably shatter the shaky ground on which my marriage stood. The notion that things couldn't possibly get worse was a naivety I could no longer afford. And just when I thought I had acclimated to my new normal, the unthinkable happened. One evening, Alice showed up at our doorstep, not just with her usual bag of condescension, but with suitcases, boxes, and what seemed like half her house in tow. I've decided to move in, she announced, pushing her way past me into the living room. Excuse me, move in with us. I stammered, my eyes darting toward Mark, who seemed astonishingly unperturbed by this development. Well, yes, I'm getting older, and I'd like to spend more time with my son, Alice said, beginning to unpack her things as if the decision was already final. I looked at Mark, my eyes practically screaming for him to do something. Mark, can I talk to you for a moment? I pulled him aside, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Mark, this can't happen. She can't just move in. Our marriage is already strained, and her being here will make it impossible to mend anything, I whispered urgently. Mark sighed. Look, she's my mom, Sarah. She needs to be closer to her family now. We have to adjust. Adjust? I've been adjusting since day one, Mark. When will you adjust for me? When will you stand up for us? For our home, our marriage? The words poured out of me like a dam breaking. Mark looked away, avoiding my gaze. She's already here, Sarah. It would be rude to ask her to leave now. So there it was. Alice moved in, and with her came a nightmare I had not dared to imagine. Every day was a new battle. She criticized the way I arranged the furniture, how I did the laundry, even how I breathed. And each time Mark stood silently by, his apathy condoning her abusive behavior. But it wasn't just the daily nitpicking and criticisms that wore me down. It was the evident joy she took in making me miserable. One day, while cleaning the house, I discovered a bag of prescription medications hidden away in the kitchen cupboard. Pills for anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, the works. When I confronted her about it, she exploded. Who do you think you are snooping around my things? You are nothing, a guest in my son's life, and you have no business in my private affairs, she shrieked. A guest in my own house? The audacity was astonishing. But what was even more astonishing was that Mark, who had overheard the entire conversation, chose that moment to speak up, not in my defense, but in hers. Sarah, if my mom says they're private, then they're private. Stay out of it, he admonished, once again picking the wrong side of a very clear moral divide. It was a betrayal too great to comprehend fully, and I found myself numb, unable to react. That's when it dawned on me. Alice wasn't just a hostile mother-in-law. She was a predator, systematically breaking down my defenses and claiming my life as her territory. And Mark, he wasn't aloof or indifferent. He was complicit, actively or passively aiding her in the destruction of our marriage. In that moment, as I looked at Alice's triumphant smirk and Mark's avoiding eyes, I made a decision. I wouldn't just be a spectator in this tragedy. I would take control of my life, even if it meant breaking away from the people who were supposed to be my family. But as it turned out, fate had another curveball to throw my way, one that would finally compel me to act, to bring an end to this farce that my life had become. In the weeks following Alice's uninvited occupation of my home, my life devolved into a living nightmare. The constant surveillance, the petty criticisms, and the ever-looming shadow of my mother-in-law made each day an exercise in emotional survival. Her reign of terror expanded from mere commentary on my cooking and decorating to include personal jabs about my looks, my intelligence, and even my worthiness as a spouse. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, Alice began picking at another one of my failures. This time, it was my career, or according to her, my lack of one. You know, a good wife would contribute more than just bad cooking to her family. A job wouldn't hurt, you know. Not that you'd be qualified for anything worthwhile, she sneered. Though her words were like daggers, I couldn't let her see me bleed. I have a job, Alice, I retorted, and my income is just as crucial to this household as Mark's is. Is that so? She raised an eyebrow. Then why are we living in your shabby little house rather than a home that reflects the dignity of my son? Before I could muster a response, Mark, who had been engrossed in his phone, chimed in, Mom's got a point, Sarah. You could be doing more. We could be doing better. It felt like a sucker punch. Each syllable was a betrayal, each word a new crack in the already fragile foundation of our marriage. As I struggled to hold back tears, Mark got up, patting his mother on the back as he left the room, leaving me alone with the she-wolf who had infiltrated my life. With Mark gone, Alice leaned closer and whispered, You see, he'll always be my son. You're just the girl he settled for. I turned away, my body trembling with a cocktail of fury and humiliation. My eyes fell on our wedding photo, a staged moment of Fox happiness. How had I ended up here? When had my love story turned into a grotesque theater of cruelty? The nightmare escalated when one day I found something alarming while cleaning the kitchen, a small packet of unidentified pills stashed behind the spice jars. My mind raced through the possibilities. When I confronted Alice about it, her reaction was nothing short of explosive. How dare you invade my privacy, you insolent child? It's none of your business, she roared, her face red with fury. For the first time, I didn't hold back. This is my house, Alice, and what you're doing is illegal. This affects me too. Just then, Mark entered the room, visibly annoyed. What's going on here? Ask your wife. She's turned into a detective, snooping through other people's stuff. Alice spat, throwing me a venomous look. Mark turned to me, his voice icy. Sarah, why can't you just let things be? Why are you causing problems? That's when it hit me. There was no team in this marriage. Mark wasn't just failing to protect me. He was actively siding with the enemy. I felt like a stranger in my own home, suffocating under the weight of their combined disdain. But little did they know, their actions were only stealing my resolve. I would not be cowed. I would not let them break me. I would survive this nightmare and emerge stronger. And as events soon unfolded, I would get an unexpected opportunity to turn the tables, to finally reclaim my life and self-respect from the clutches of this unholy alliance. Mark's friend Jake was throwing a party, and despite my reservations about appearing in public as the happy couple, I was practically forced to attend. Maybe part of me also wanted a brief respite, a night off from the persistent nightmare that my home had become. "Come on, Sarah, it'll be good for us. We need a break," Mark insisted, his words more an instruction than a request. We arrived at Jake's lavish house, and for the first half-hour or so, everything seemed normal. People laughed, glasses clinked, and music filled the air. But as the night wore on, I realized Mark was increasingly distant. He mingled, but more with others than with me. And when I did catch his eye, he seemed almost irritated by my presence. Then Mark vanished. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. After searching unsuccessfully among the guests, I started to check the less populated areas of the house. That's when I heard it. A soft giggle followed by a voice unmistakably Mark's. My heart sank even before I reached the door from which the sounds emanated. Taking a deep breath to brace myself for whatever lay beyond, I'd opened the door. There he was, Mark, entangled with another woman, neither of them noticing my entrance. For what felt like an eternity. When they finally did, the look on his face wasn't one of guilt or regret. It was annoyance. "Sarah, what the hell? Haven't you heard of knocking?" Mark snapped, as if I was the one in the wrong. "Knocking? Are you serious? What are you doing, Mark?" My voice trembled, not with sadness, but with fiery rage. "Just catching up with an old friend," he replied, a smirk replacing his initial annoyance. The room spun around me. Catching up? Is that what we're calling it now? I couldn't contain my contempt. His face turned red, a mixture of embarrassment and fury. "You're making a scene. Let's talk about this at home," he said. But I was done talking. I was done with the humiliation, the abuse, and the blatant disrespect. I stormed out, my entire body shaking. Mark didn't follow me. He didn't even call out as I left. I went home alone, my mind racing but surprisingly clear. A line had been crossed, a boundary irrevocably broken. The next morning, Mark sauntered into the house as if nothing had happened. It was then that Alice, ever the opportunist, decided to intervene. "I heard about last night," she began, her voice dripping with Fox concern. "You should know better than to embarrass yourself and my son like that." That was the last straw. "Embarrass me? You have the audacity to talk to me about embarrassment after everything you and your son have done." My voice rose, each word fueled by months of pent-up anger and frustration. Alice reached for her phone. "If you don't calm down, I'll call the police." "Go ahead," I said, locking eyes with her as I dialed my own number into the phone. "They might be interested in the package in the kitchen cupboard." Mark looked puzzled, then alarmed. But before he could say anything, the doorbell rang. As I opened the door to the police officers, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was as if all the chaos, all the pain, had crystallized into this singular moment of clarity. It was time for my nightmare to end and for theirs to begin. The police officers were puzzled but professional. "We received a call about a domestic disturbance," one of them inquired. "Yes, and while you're here, I think you should check our kitchen cupboard. I found something that you might find interesting," I responded, meeting Alice's eyes as I spoke. Her face went ashen, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of fear replace her habitual sneer. "What is she talking about, Mom?" Mark looked from me to his mother, his confusion giving way to panic. "Mind showing us what you're referring to, ma'am?" The officer's gaze was stern but curious as I led them to the kitchen and pointed to the cupboard. Mark's voice wavered in a desperate tone. "Mom, what did you do?" The officers found the packet of pills and immediately turned to Alice. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." "But those aren't mine," Alice stammered, her voice quivering with disbelief. "That can be sorted out later. For now, you are under arrest," the officer replied, cuffing her as she shot me a look of raw, impotent rage. After the police had taken Alice away, I turned to Mark, who seemed on the verge of a breakdown. Is this what you wanted, Sarah? To destroy this family? Destroy this family? I echoed incredulously. Mark, you and your mother destroyed this family long before today. You cheated on me, belittled me, allowed your mother to abuse me in my own home. The destruction was your doing, not mine. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. So what now? Divorce? Is that what you want? For the first time, Mark, it's not about what you or your mother want. It's about what I deserve. And yes, I deserve better than this farce of a marriage. Within weeks, the divorce proceedings were underway. I couldn't say it was a pleasant experience, but it was necessary. The trial that followed was the reckoning for both Mark and Alice. My soon-to-be ex-husband was exposed for the spineless enabler he was, while his mother received a 5-year prison sentence for possession of illegal substances. As I sat in the courtroom, watching Alice being led away, a wave of mixed emotions washed over me. Victory, certainly, but also a profound sadness for what could have, should have been a loving family. Mark caught my eye and looked away, unable to hold my gaze. The man I had married was a stranger, one I was finally free from. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor like the ticking of a clock. Each step took me further away from the nightmare my life had become. As I stepped into the sunlight, I realized that this was not just an ending but also a new beginning. The years that followed were about rediscovery and healing, and though the scars remained, they served as a constant reminder of my own strength, resilience, and self-worth. The nightmare was over, but the lessons it taught me would last a lifetime. I had faced the worst and survived, emerging not as a victim, but as a woman who would never again settle for anything less than what she deserved. My name is Abigail, and for a fleeting moment, I believed that the wedding aisle would be a pathway to a new happy life. A simple woman with an 8-year-old son, Tim, from my previous marriage, I had dreams like anyone else: love, companionship, and a stable family. Tim was skeptical about changes, but he'd warmed up to Henry, my new husband, quickly enough. We were small, imperfect, but content. That is, until Clara happened. The wedding was a grand affair. Clara, as the mother of the groom, had somehow assumed the role of a wedding planner with dictatorial powers. The venue, the flowers, and even my gown. She had something to say about everything. The more she micromanaged, the more I felt like an outsider at my own wedding. Abby, don't you think you should reconsider that dress? She scoffed as I tried on my bridal gown. Actually, I really love this dress, I defended, hoping Henry would step in. That's just how she is, Abby, Henry mumbled, not meeting my eyes. She means well. The night before the wedding, as we were setting up, Clara berated the florist for the choice of roses. Don't you have something more exotic? These are just so common, much like Abby's taste, she criticized. This time, I couldn't contain myself. Clara looked at me as if I were an irritating fly she couldn't swat away. My son deserves the best, and if you can't provide it, then someone has to, she declared. Henry was right there, but he said nothing, just sighed, giving me a look as if to say, "What can we do?" The final straw came during the wedding reception. Tim, nervous but excited, had prepared a small speech. As he stood up to speak, Clara loudly whispered, "Oh God, what is the child going to babble about?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. I looked at Henry, waiting for him to defend our new family, but he did nothing as Tim nervously read his heartfelt speech. It was then that I realized I had made a monumental mistake. I was now tied to a man who would never stand up for me, and worse, to a woman who would forever undermine me. That night, as I slipped into my wedding bed, Henry sensed my unhappiness, but dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "You know how mothers are, Abby. Give it time," he said. "Time for what? For her to completely belittle me? For you to finally stand up for your wife?" I replied, but Henry sighed. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Sleep, okay. Tomorrow is a new day." Yes, a new day, the first in a series of miserable days that were to come. But back then, I didn't know that. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, pondering the gravity of the vows we just made, vows that already felt broken. After the chaos of the wedding, I foolishly thought that life would settle into some semblance of normalcy. Henry moved into the home that Tim and I had made for ourselves over the years. This had been a joyous period, a honeymoon phase filled with new beginnings. But Clara's influence was as invasive as ivy creeping through the cracks and choking the life out of our new family. The first visit happened just a week after our wedding. It was a Sunday, and I was busy making a family dinner, something to celebrate our first week as a married couple. The menu was classic comfort food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. I was just setting the table when Clara breezed into our home like an unexpected cold front. "Oh my, what an interesting spread," she declared, as if she were a judge on some kind of culinary TV show. Her eyes roved dismissively over the dishes on the table. "I thought it would be nice to have a home-cooked meal for our first Sunday dinner together," I explained, trying to hide my annoyance. "That might be what you're accustomed to, but Henry was raised with more sophisticated tastes," Clara countered, twisting her lips into a sly smile. Henry, who had been conspicuously silent, suddenly found his voice. "Mom, Abby worked hard on this. Let's just enjoy the meal," he said. But his words lacked force or conviction. Was this an ally or another passive observer in my life? I couldn't help but wonder. We sat down for dinner, but Clara's eyes didn't miss a thing. She commented on how the living room could use a woman's touch, hinting at its inadequacy. She criticized the way Tim held his fork, offering to enroll him in etiquette classes. And when I finally brought out my homemade apple pie, a family recipe passed down from my grandmother, she took one bite and said, "Oh dear, did you mistake salt for sugar?" The air was so thick with tension, you could slice it with a knife. Tim appeared increasingly uneasy, shrinking in his seat like a violet. Henry silently consumed his meal, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Clara, you've made your points. Is there anything you actually like about this place? Or are you just here to make us feel unwelcome in our own home?" I finally burst out, unable to contain myself any longer. Clara looked at me with feigned surprise, as if she had been offering constructive criticism all along. "I'm just trying to help you be a better fit for my son." Henry's voice finally interjected, albeit weakly. "Mom, let's keep the criticism down, okay?" he continued. "But I'm just saying," Clara began, only to be interrupted by Henry. "No, Mom, enough," he asserted, but the lack of force in his words made them almost meaningless. Clara pursed her lips and went quiet, but the damage was done. We finished our meal in silence, each bite tasting like sawdust. When Clara finally left the house, it felt like a battleground after a war, scarred and void of life. That night, as I cleaned up the kitchen, I wondered how many more of these family dinners I could endure. Tim, who had retreated to his room right after dessert, was the silent victim in all of this. And Henry, he was becoming more of a mystery each day, a man torn between two worlds, neither of which he was willing to fully inhabit. Henry came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "She'll get better, Abby. You'll see," he reassured me. I wanted to believe him, but as I looked around my own home, a place that had once been my son's sanctuary, but now felt like hostile territory, I couldn't help but wonder. Would we ever truly be a family, or were we doomed to live in the shadow of a woman hell-bent on keeping us apart? By the time winter rolled in, the tension in our home had reached its boiling point. Every visit from Clara turned into a grueling ordeal, each insult cutting deeper than the last. Tim had become increasingly withdrawn, and even Henry seemed to sense that things were unraveling. However, instead of confronting his mother, Henry suggested that I make more effort to get along with her. "I don't know how much more I can take, Henry," I said to him one evening as we lay in bed. "Your mother treats this house like it's her kingdom, and we are merely her subjects." Henry rolled onto his side to face me. "She's a strong personality, sure, but she's also my mother, Abby. Can't you try to see the good in her?" Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Henry about a car ride the next evening. Just the girls, Tim, and me to clear the air. I looked at Henry puzzled. Your mother wants to go for a car ride to clear the air. What do you think she's up to? I asked. I don't know, Abby, but maybe it's a good sign. Maybe she's trying to make amends, he suggested, ever the optimist where his mother was concerned. My gut told me to decline the invitation, but against my better judgment, I agreed. What was the worst that could happen? I thought. Little did I know, I was walking straight into a trap. The next evening, we bundled up and climbed into Clara's luxury SUV. Tim sat in the back, his face lit by the glow of his handheld gaming device, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but there. I rode shotgun nervously, fiddling with my seat belt as Clara drove. So, where are we going? I asked, my voice tinged with skepticism. Just a little drive around town. It's good to talk in a neutral setting, Clara replied, her eyes focused on the road. Neutral since when is your car neutral? I thought to myself. But I said nothing, hoping for the best. A half hour into the drive, Clara finally broke the silence. Abigail, I've been doing some thinking, and it's become painfully obvious that you're out of your depth here, she declared. Excuse me? I replied, stunned by the directness of her insult. You heard me. You're a divorcee with a child, trying to fit into a life you know nothing about. Henry deserves a woman who can actually add something valuable to his life, she continued, her words landing like a heavy blow. The audacity of her words left me breathless. I looked at Tim through the rearview mirror. He had removed his headphones and was listening intently, concern filling his young eyes. Clara, you've got it all wrong. I love Henry, and he loves me, and Tim is a part of that package, I asserted, my voice trembling with emotion. Love? What'd you call love? I call settling, she retorted, pulling the car to the side of the road near a stretch of deserted land. I think it's time for you and Tim to get out and think about what you've done to my family. You can't be serious. It's freezing out there, I protested. Very serious. Now get out, she commanded, her voice steely. I glanced at Tim, his face a mixture of confusion and fear, and I knew I had to protect him. As we stepped out into the cold, Clara sped off, leaving us stranded miles from home. We started walking, our steps heavy, each footfall a painful reminder of the trap we had just walked into. But with each step, I also felt a new resolve forming inside me. Clara had overplayed her hand this time, and I was ready to finally end this game. The moment the car's taillights disappeared into the distance, the gravity of our situation sank in. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere, under a moonless sky with temperatures plummeting. I looked down at Tim. His eyes were wide, a mix of fear and disbelief clouding his young face. Mom, why did Grandma do that? Tim's voice wavered as he spoke, his breath visible in the icy air. I don't know, baby, but we're going to be okay. I promise, I said, mustering as much strength as I could. I took out my phone. No signal, of course. Clara had chosen a place far removed from civilization for her cruel scheme. Which way is home? Tim asked, shivering. We're too far from our house. But my parents live about 8 kilometers that way, I said, pointing down the road that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walk was excruciating. With each step, the cold seemed to pierce deeper into our bones. We were not dressed for this kind of weather, not prepared for this brutal test of endurance. A couple of times, Tim stumbled, and each time he did, my heart sank. I couldn't help but think of the irreparable damage Clara was causing, not just between her and me, but between her and her own grandson. Halfway through, Tim's complaints about his cold hands grew more urgent. My fingers hurt, Mom, he said, his voice trembling. I tried rubbing them, blowing on them, doing anything I could to bring some warmth back into his tiny red hands, but I knew we were in a bad situation that was getting worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the distant lights of my parents' home flickered on the horizon like a beacon in the dark. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming, but as we reached the doorstep, and I looked down at Tim's hands, my heart sank. His fingers were an alarming shade of white. Mom, Dad, we need help," I screamed as I banged on their front door. Within seconds, they were there, rushing us inside. My mother gasped when she saw Tim's hands, and my father immediately started the car to take us to the hospital. Before we left, I grabbed my phone, finally back in signal range, and dialed Clara's number. "You've gone too far this time," I hissed into the phone when she picked up. "Tim has frostbite because of you. I'm taking this to the authorities." There was a momentary pause on the other end. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would, and I will." "This ends now," I replied, hanging up. As we drove to the hospital, my father at the wheel, my mother comforting Tim in the back seat, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that we had escaped a potentially deadly situation, anger at Clara for what she had done, but most of all, a newfound determination. Clara had unleashed something in me that she hadn't anticipated. She wanted to break me, but instead, she had fortified my resolve to put an end to her reign of terror once and for all. The sterile smell of the hospital was as unnerving as always, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of urgency and dread. Tim was rushed into the emergency room, where the medical staff immediately started treating his frostbitten hands. My parents sat with me in the waiting area, their faces etched with concern and anger. "Abigail, are you gonna let this go?" "You can't let Clara get away with this," my father urged, his voice tinged with disbelief. "No, Dad, I won't let her get away with it. I've already called a lawyer. We're going to sue her," I said, my voice filled with newfound determination. I looked at my mom. Her eyes were filled with worry. "Pride, good for you, honey. No one has the right to treat you or Tim like this, not even family," she said. My phone buzzed. It was Henry. "Addie, my mom called me, said you're making threats." "What's going on?" "The threats, as you call them, are promises, Henry. Your mother left Tim and me in the middle of nowhere in freezing temperatures. Tim has frostbite. We're in the hospital," I replied, my voice quivering with a mix of fear and anger. There was silence on the other end. "I can't believe she would do something like that. I'm coming to the hospital." "Don't bother," I snapped, cutting the call. Minutes turned to hours, but finally a doctor emerged from the ER. "Your son is stable now. We've managed to treat the frostbite, but he'll need ongoing care and physical therapy. There might be long-term damage." I felt a range of emotions, relief that Tim was okay, but also a smoldering rage towards Clara for causing this agony in the first place. This was the turning point. There was no going back. When we returned home, my lawyer called. "We've got a strong case, Abigail. We can not only sue for emotional distress, but also for child endangerment. Let's do it. Let's make sure she can never harm anyone again," I said, resolved. Later that night, Clara called. Her voice trembled. "Abigail, can we talk?" "No, Clara, we can't. Your time for talking is over. See you in court." After hanging up, I felt neither satisfaction nor victory. Those emotions would perhaps never come in a situation as ugly as this. But what I did feel was empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, standing up against the tyranny that Clara had imposed on us for so long. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with legal battles and probably a divorce, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the woman who would be pushed into the corner, who would be silenced and mistreated. This was my turning point, and from here on, there would be no looking back. The courtroom was a whirlpool of tension, but as I sat there awaiting the verdict, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Across from me, Clara looked visibly distressed, her eyes darting between her lawyer and the judge. Henry was there too, but we hardly exchanged glances. We had become strangers bound only by the impending legal outcomes. "Does the prosecution have any closing statements?" the judge inquired, his eyes scanning the room. My lawyer rose from his seat. "Your Honor, the evidence and testimonies clearly demonstrate that Mrs. Clara Edwards knowingly and intentionally endangered the lives of Abigail and her son Tim. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a calculated act of cruelty that could have resulted in a far greater tragedy." The room fell silent as the judge turned to Clara's defense attorney. "Your Honor," he began, struggling to make eye contact. Mrs. Edwards deeply regrets the emotional strain she's caused her family, but she insists her actions were not intended to bring physical harm. That's irrelevant, the judge interrupted. Intention to harm or not, harm was done. The evidence is clear. As the judge retreated to his chamber for the final verdict, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was a message from Henry. Are you happy now? I looked up and caught his eye. Am I happy? My son could have suffered irreparable harm. This isn't about happiness, it's about justice. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge returned. I've considered the evidence and testimonies carefully, he began, shuffling his papers. It is the court's decision that Mrs. Clara Edwards is guilty on counts of child endangerment and emotional distress. She is hereby sentenced to 2 years in a federal prison. The room seemed to both tense up and exhale at the same time, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Clara's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Henry looked lost, but at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. As people started filing out of the courtroom, Clara approached me, tears streaming down her face. "Abigail, can you ever forgive me?" she asked. "I think you should be asking Tim for forgiveness, not me," I replied coldly. "But even if he forgives you, things will never be the same. You've lost not just a daughter-in-law, but a grandson too." Walking out of the courtroom, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. This was not a happy ending. Too much pain had been inflicted for happiness to have a place here. But it was a just ending, one that held the promise of new beginnings. That evening, I sat down with Tim and explained that his grandma Clara would be going away for a while. "Why, Mom?" he asked, his eyes full of questions. I didn't have simple answers to that. Sometimes people make very bad choices, and they have to face the consequences, I said, pulling him into a hug. As I held him, I knew that the most challenging part of our journey was behind us. It was time to rebuild and move forward, not just as survivors, but as warriors who have faced down their demons and emerged stronger on the other side. And so we did. I filed for divorce, focused on Tim's recovery, and took time to heal. No, things would never go back to the way they were, but they could certainly get better. And in that promise of better, I found my revenge, my justice, and my peace.